we did look at the general cost and benefits, and just to continue on, we might cover some other questions that might come up.
Okay.
We looked at the project team, including our fiscal consultants as well, are projecting about $90,000 in annual taxes to be paid to the county and local municipalities. Additionally, we're looking at about $175,000 in municipal tap-in permit engineering and other fees, would be more of the one-time costs. And we're looking at the approximate value of the constructed project of a little over $2 million. We looked at the impact on schools, basically the fact that this is an over 62 population. We don't see any negative impact on the schools. We see a positive in the fact that these people will be paying their school taxes, but not sending children to school. So we see it as a benefit to that. We were asked in the code to look at transportation. Although there's parking available, as many of you know, Phoenixville is a very walkable borough, fortunately for all of us. And automobiles are not needed for daily use, especially for local trips like to Franklin Commons. In addition to that, there is also the SEPTA bus, the 205 bus comes near the site to as close to Franklin and Emmett, a couple blocks away. And for elderly people, the Rover transportation is also available that could be used, which is funded by the Pennsylvania Lottery. The park and recreation areas were analyzed. Basically, seniors typically seek out passive recreation. There are some really active seniors out there, but we're looking at the generalities. Recreation, health, and well-being opportunities exist all throughout the borough, and including the YMCA, the Phoenixville Civic Center, the Senior Center. We looked at the borough's parks. There's one directly across the street. There's plenty of parks that would be of benefit and would be used by these residents. We also see that the typical uses that they would use in the parks would be walking, nature observation, possibly even gardening at the community garden almost directly across the street.
Did you, just a quick question, I don't want to anticipate what council did. Knowing that, did you anticipate or plan for any improvements to those parks, knowing that increased usage from those residents?
We did not as part of this plan.
Okay. Do you intend to engage in conversation with the Parks and Rec Committee and the manager in relation to that?
We certainly could.
Okay, thank you.
We looked at the nearest library is the Phoenixville Library, a little over a mile away from the site, and the next closest library is in Royersford. Obviously, Phoenixville Hospital would serve these residents well. We looked at, we list off the fire and ambulance rescue services that are available in the borough. We list them in the report, but we did not do an in-depth analysis of demand. Police protection was also analyzed. At the time of the writing the report and the interviews that we did, we had 27 police officers. Understand that that has increased since we wrote the report. Utility needs, there's existing utilities adjacent to the site that could serve the site, water, gas, sanitary sewer, and we've received for a similar project earlier, will serve letters from the utilities, so utilities are available for this site. We briefly covered the storm drainage for the site, that it is available and it will be enhanced and upgraded. This site would require an NPDS, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit in order to go forward. So we would be basically working with the county and Department of Environmental Protection to make sure that the stormwater is done according to current codes. So that's my review of the environmental impact analysis.
That was the fiscal and community impact.
Fiscal, I'm sorry.
One other item in discussing, also we're willing to entertain discussions regarding to potential needs for improvements to parks, but it should be noted that there is additional parking being proposed with this project that will be an improvement for the adjoining park. And stormwater management to handle, I guess, the existing parking and the additional parking at no cost to the borough. The next item in our review, has this, are you aware if this conditional use application was reviewed by any of the borough consultants?
We did receive a review letter from Ray Ott and Associates, so yes, it was reviewed.
And and that letter is in your packet as Exhibit A9. Have you reviewed that letter?
I have.
And can you summarize what the conclusions of that letter are?
Basically, the conclusions at the end of the letter, there's two comments at the end of the letter that kind of conclude and summarize what was said. The submission, the letter concludes that the submission appears to meet all the requirements of the conditional use application for a senior housing development in the MR district. I'm sorry. For a senior housing development in the MR district. And the second comment was basically that a comment that although we're allowed 50-foot building height and 4 stories, they commented that we are keeping the buildings at 3 stories, which is more in keeping with the scale of the neighborhood. So positive comments essentially regarding the conditional use.
Okay. Are you aware, was this application reviewed by the Borough Planning Commission as well?
Yes, on September 13th.
No.
I'm sorry, November 14th. I apologize.
And are you aware of, were there any recommendations made with regard to, by the Planning Commission at the November 14th, 2013 meeting? Did they, is your understanding that the Planning Commission recommended the conditional use for this application?
Yes, they did.
And is that discussion contained in the minutes which are provided as Exhibit A10?
Yes, they are.
A little more background with regard to the senior housing requirements and if this site meets those requirements. Are you familiar when the senior housing zoning district or the senior housing requirements were added to the MR zoning district?
Based on records, it appears that the amendment was made on September 13th, 2011.
And when that amendment was made, is it your understanding that that was done specifically with regard to allow such use on this property?
Yes, there were discussions regarding this property when that amendment was made.
And was there an actual pending application for a senior housing project for this site at that time?
Yes, there was.
And council ultimately adopted that ordinance to allow this use on this property?
Yes.
And the minutes to that meeting are contained, of September 13, 2011, Borough Council are contained as Exhibit A11 in your packet. I guess, Mr. Suppley, in your professional opinion as a planner, is the proposed project in any way detrimental or out of the character of the surrounding neighborhood?
No, I believe it does fit in with the surrounding neighborhood.
Can you, I guess, elaborate a little bit as to why you believe it fits in?
Yes. First of all, the site is zoned for this. The zoning permits it. Therefore, it has been discussed and deliberated before we came to the site. It is permitted as a conditional use, and therefore it does fit in with the code that was in place at the time that we submitted the application. As we saw from the photographs and the analysis of the site surrounding and the proposed use, which will be shown at a later time with other presentations, this site does, the proposed use does fit in with the surroundings.
Yeah, I have no further questions for Mr. Suppley.
Ms. Dugan, if you would like, perhaps you can entertain some questions councilors may have of this witness.
That's what I was going to do first. Before I open it to the public, does council have any comment on what we just saw?
I do. So, Mr. Selby, I'd just like to ask a few questions. No doubt that looking at your CV and your quality of work, it's impressive. You do good work. Just out of curiosity, your firm and yourself, KMS, have a vested interest in this project. Is that correct?
We've been hired by the builder or the developer to do the designs for the project, so yes, we do.
Okay. And is it a fair statement that you've invested a lot of time and effort?
We have invested a lot of time and effort, as we would as a professional consultant hired to do a project like this.
So my question is, an expert opinion. It should be unbiased. It should have no relation to the project. I'm failing to see how you're providing us with an unbiased expert opinion.
I don't know how any consultant hired would provide such an opinion. They've been hired to review the regulations and the plan and provide an opinion. You could, any professional can provide such a comment. I mean, you can.
Well, perhaps it's better that he answers that question.
Okay.
And maybe Mr. Suplee and his professional opinion says, based on what he reviewed, how he came to his conclusion, the fact, and take into account that he is compensated.
Certainly. I've been sworn in to state the truth, and regardless of my position as a professional, I do see this as a use that does fit in the area. We've reviewed the zoning that was in place at the time, and we've reviewed the comprehensive plan that's in place, and it does fit. This use does fit. The zoning does promulgate what was shown in the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding, and this is reflected in the current statement up on the board there. Does any of this project utilize any part of the borough-owned property adjacent to it?
This project, the proposed use, does not utilize the project adjacent to it, with the exception of discharging stormwater through the existing utilities that are on that site. This project proposes to add additional parking, which has basically has already been outlined with curbing. We're going to try to keep that as much as possible. However, we're going to make that safe and complete. Right now, I wouldn't see that as being completely safe and certainly not complete in construction.
So the black line through that parking lot on the right represents the border, the boundary for the 2.952 acres? I'm sorry, yeah. So the black line that runs through the parking lot that you currently have the cursor over, that's the representative of the right-hand border for the 2.952 acres of your property.
You are correct.
So the parking to the right, if we were to not approve that, because it is on borough property, do you have a drawing or rendering representing what you would do without it?
We do not have a drawing representing what we would do without it, but we certainly could produce that. We could provide the necessary parking for our site, on our site, without using or benefiting the park adjacent to us.
Okay. Secondly, not all, this is for Mr. Crack, not all of this document was provided in our packet that I can tell. Specifically, the A14, the traffic impact analysis. I don't know if that was an administrative error or maybe we didn't have it, so I haven't actually had time to look at every single piece to this. Was all of this in our packet, or should it have been?
I actually don't have all of the documents at any given time because they come through the planning commission. I do try to extrapolate out of the planning commission, put them into council's packets, but that's also why they're obviously they're presented as part of the as amendments to this document here.
Okay.
And also to answer your question, just so you're cognizant, the parking, that parking piece was a component in the deal. You may not be aware of that, but there was in the transition of the property to Friendship, there was a requirement that between the borough and and Friendship at the time of a percentage of, we would do certain percentage of work on the property, and then they would do a certain percentage of the work on the property. That requirement is that parking lot, and to finish out the basin. Those are two requirements as part of the remaining deal between Friendship and the borough from 6-7 years ago.
So does that statement mean that we have to accept the building of this parking lot onto the borough property?
You don't have to. We would certainly encourage you to do that because it benefits the ball fields and the playing fields there. But you obviously, council can do what council wants to do.
Okay. The traffic study that is in here says that there's going to be an increase of about 4% daily in traffic. There's a lot, if you're aware, of building going up in the north side in that particular area. I'm just wondering if that traffic study took into effect the almost 200 new townhomes to be built on Fillmore, as well as additional construction that's going up on Fillmore. Is that reflective of the increase?
Well, we have the traffic.
Yeah, although I believe I could answer the question, I'm going to defer that to our traffic consultant.
Okay. And then lastly, just putting it on the record, I have some major concerns over emergency coverage for this type of housing project going up in this location. I just think we need to really examine whether or not we have the capacity in our current state to make sure it would be adequately covered. Thank you.
Did anybody else on council have anything they wanted to add? Go ahead, Bowers. Mr. Bowers.
Thank you. Number of things. You've stated that the building coverage is 20%. So I don't see I can't find numbers on the plans that tell me that it's, what your building coverage is or
I could
dimensions
try
that-
to zoom in.
I'm not going to try to look at it. You said 20%, but I mean, if you scale, I tried to roughly scale what's on the illustration here, and I mean, I'm coming up with more in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 to 42%. So which is it?
I believe that our numbers are correct. I'm going to stand behind them. They were
Only
done. They were
20%.
done digitally in AutoCAD. One thing that might be a little bit deceiving is just the fact that our site is a little bit smaller, and that might play the opposite. But what's shown in color on the plan extends into the park because we're proposing those improvements in the park as well. However, we did the calculations as far as the amount of coverage, and we're well within the reasonable amount, or the maximum amount of impervious coverage, which is 40%. But I do stand that the numbers, to the best of my knowledge, are correct.
So the building coverage is within the 40%. How about total impervious surface?
I'll zoom back into that data table if that helps for reference. The maximum impervious surface of 65%, we're certainly below that. We're not too much below it. We're close to 58%. So there is a lot of impervious coverage, but at the same time, there's a decent amount of green space on the site. And again, those numbers stand true.
Again, as illustrated to us, you are planning an underground stormwater management system.
That is correct.
You've indicated that this site has percolation problems. So could you elaborate on how you would manage the stormwater underground?
Certainly.
Under those circumstances?
What would be done in a project like this is the underground stormwater is stormwater storage just as much as you would see above ground. An above ground stormwater basin does not especially have to infiltrate the water. If the soils are not capable of taking on any more water, then the water would just be held. And that's why the size of this basin is actually a little bit bigger than you would normally see if there was infiltration. So what's being designed is capturing all the stormwater as it would be required and releasing it at a slow rate so that it doesn't overwhelm the system that it's discharging to. So it's not that we're recharging the stormwater onto the site. We are running the stormwater through what's proposed right now as 2 rain gardens. The large islands in the middle of the parking lot are rain gardens. So we would be basically putting in imported soil that does have a higher infiltration value, letting the water filter through those soils and then discharging to the stormwater basin so that it can be held to be released slowly. So it is not infiltrating. It's not an infiltration basin.
you would be capturing the roof water in this system as well?
All the impervious coverage would be
All the
addressed.
impervious coverage.
Yes.
That's including the existing parking for the park, is that correct?
That's correct. The impervious coverage, all the impervious coverage that's shown as tan color on this site would be addressed by the underground stormwater basin. So basically, our basin is a little bit larger than our site itself requires, because we're going to take in additional stormwater that's coming in off of that parking lot.
Which includes the street, which includes the park across the street.
The grading will hasn't been that to that level of detail, but any water that's coming onto our site will need to be addressed in one way or another. We will have to follow the regulations of the borough and the county as far as the stormwater management would be required.
What is your finished proposed cartway for Fillmore? For Fillmore Street?
There's no
Curb to curb. What's your finished
there's
cartway?
no change in the cartway width. However, we are proposing to, I guess, finish off the parallel parking spaces that are there. So we're not looking to change the curb to curb width. I don't know if I have that distance for you, but we're not looking to change the existing conditions. I can see if it's demonstrated on the plan.
So you would just maintain you're just saying you would build to the existing?
That's correct. Yeah.
No improvements?
We're not proposing to widen or change Fillmore or Franklin for that matter. We are, as far as your question regarding improvements, we are proposing to improve any of the curb that is necessary to be improved, as well as any of the sidewalks that are out there that need to be improved. We're planning to address any of that. For example, there's a curb cut that is right about where I'm showing on the cursor in the top center of the site. That's existing conditions. There's a utility pole in the middle of that driveway curb cut, and we don't need that. So we're going to close that back off again and restore the curb to a safe condition. Right now, it's just not safe.
You've submitted a transportation plan and made a number of transportation comments in your studies, but what I'm not seeing is that you have you or have you not submitted a transportation plan that outlines transportation services for the residents of the facility?
We did include that in the impact statement. It's not a separate plan. There were multiple plans that were merged together, just as other applications for this site were done. It's basically the paragraph that I reviewed saying the existing transportation that includes the SEPTA and the Rover are available currently. So we addressed them in the report. We didn't put a separate cover page on that because it's so
public
small.
transportation is
Correct.
your solution for transportation for the residents of that facility?
Yes, unless they're driving their own cars. And if they're driving their own cars, we provide ample parking for them based on the requirements of the code.
And to support that, buses need to transit those streets, and you're proposing no improvements to those streets.
That's correct. We're also not proposing any additional SEPTA routes or anything like that. We would be looking to take advantage of the conditions that exist and are available,
Adam,
which we feel are adequate.
the percentage of impervious surface on the right-hand side of this document, that's just for the 2.9 some odd acres there? That
Yes,
does not
that's-
include the parking lot to the right?
That's correct. The percentage is a calculation based on the 2.95 acres compared to what's impervious coverage on the site within the site boundaries.
How many
we wouldn't be able to roll in that parking space without encompassing the area around it, so the numbers wouldn't quite jive that way.
How many parking spots fall within your project, excluding those that are outside of your boundary there? Meaning the 2.952? How many parking spots are within the 2.952?
I can answer the inverse of that a lot quicker. There's
Yep.
17 parking spaces that are proposed outside of our property. There's 20 spaces along the left-hand side of that double row I'm showing with my cursor right here. There's 20 spaces here, and there's 17 spaces here. So the way that it's currently configured, that's the total that is kind of off from the main parking lot that would be serving this.
So you're confident if we were to request a drawing without the shared parking, that you could meet the impervious surface requirement with all of the parking inside the 2.952?
I am, because we're not maxing out the impervious coverage right now, so I certainly am.
Okay, but it's awfully close, as you stated earlier.
Correct.
Okay. And then,
One of the options, I apologize for interrupting.
No problem.
One of the options that we could offer, if we start really pushing that boundary, is pervious pavement that could be used to let stormwater through. And you usually would do that in the parking spaces, not in the drive aisles.
Okay.
But that would basically add pervious coverage to offset some of the impervious. I don't see that we're going to need that, though.
okay, and then one other question. Since I wasn't privy to this shared parking lot, who will maintain, as in plowing and repair of that parking lot?
I'm going to have to defer to Bruce. Will the applicant, or will the owner maintain the parking lot?
They will,
Okay.
along with the underground retention basin.
Okay. So the underground retention basin, as well as all of the parking that's shown on the plan, would be maintained by the
And that includes
owner.
maintenance and snow removal?
That's correct.
Yes.
We didn't provide that as part of this presentation, but there is a previous agreement between Friendship Fire Company and the borough. I think Gene addressed it, I guess, when Friendship Fire transferred the land to the borough for the park. Part of that agreement was that the parking improvements and stormwater would be constructed by the fire company, and that those maintenance obligations would be maintained. And my client is agreeing to, I guess, carry forward with honoring those obligations. With regard to the parking, there's 109 parking spaces being proposed. They only need 72 for the use. If for some reason the borough decides, hey, we don't want you to build that over there and we don't want that additional parking, then we can reduce impervious coverage by going down to the 72. But I think it's really a benefit to the borough to have the additional parking for the park. And at least that's what the discussions we've had with staff to date on numerous different iterations of projects coming through here, was always to maintain that people who were interested, that they knew they were under the obligation to do those things for the borough.
If I could, regarding the parking, if necessary to have more parking on our site, we certainly could add additional parking where I'm showing with my cursor along the right-hand side of the core parking area, and then along the bottom edge of the core parking area. And if we needed to even exit out of our site, we could go straight up along the side of the building. We've got the ability to design within our limits. We're, as the attorney mentioned, we're looking to work with the borough based on previous agreements.
Did anyone else on council have? Go ahead.
Thank you. And just to clarify, so those improvements to parking and those improvements to stormwater are not, in fact, gifts to the borough. They are required as a condition to develop this site. Therefore, and again, cited within your studies, a facility like this impacts emergency services more than the general public. Therefore, a discussion regarding how a facility like this impacts emergency services, how the facility such as this impacts the parks facility need to be considered and should be considered as part of this condition going forward.
Anyone else? Good.
Yes, thank you. Along the same line as Councilman Bowers was saying, I guess it's a question for the solicitor to make clear to me, in the impact, where does that come in? Are the specifics of the police, fire, EMS required by the applicant to be spelled out tonight? Or is that a conversation?
He is going to meet with the manager, flush those issues out. The applicant said that he didn't specifically address those in any of his studies. We'll get together with our emergency providers here, figure out what's a reasonable extrapolation for what we think the impact will be. Mr. Crack, I'm sure, will coordinate that and get together with the applicant, hopefully to come to a voluntary contribution or some way to handle that to make sure our emergency providers aren't prejudiced by this project anyway.
Thank you.
Are we finished on council then? Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I think we, if a motion did go forward later on in the night, we could add in that emergency management should be worked out with the manager prior to moving forward. Having or knowing several different residents at the property, the senior housing development over closer to Babe Ruth Field, knowing them personally, I know that not all of them have cars, not all of them can drive. I'm comfortable with the parking. I think that quite frankly, I don't know why they would have to, I know that it's in our codes, but I don't know why they would have to provide this much parking, because not every single resident in there is going to have a car or drive. But I do think that the added parking spot, the 17 parking spots on the borough's land side is a definite benefit for the people that utilize those particular fields. And over the years, we've had several different iterations of a plan in this particular location. And I commend the developer for doing such a great job with the stormwater management, because I know over and over and over again, we've heard the residents talk throughout the years about the need for stormwater management there. And I think that this is a decent system, and I think that it will take care of a lot of the issues that are there currently. Thank you.
Is that it, everyone up here? Okay, can I open it up to the public now? Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
We ask that you just come to the podium.
We have other witnesses.
Please state your name and where you live.
And just so you realize, we do have two other witnesses. so-
Understood, but I think maybe
Okay.
we best to address this
That's
witness's
fine.
concern. Yeah. I'm sorry? Sure. If you could spell your last name, too, after you, yeah.
I'm Matthew Viscuso, V as in Victor, ISCUSO. Historically, a lot of problem with wastewater here. The people south of this property constantly have a real issue with water. Can you guarantee that this will take care of all the water on that property?
I can't guarantee anything. I'll just be honest with you. But I will say that the site will be designed to capture the stormwater that's on this site, and it will basically, the way it's designed is any of the water that's heading towards the south side of the property is going to be captured through the series of inlets and rain gardens, and at the very end, it's going to get to a curb, and it's not going to jump over the curb because there's more inlets that are going to be capturing that water. The stormwater basin is sized to accommodate the large storms that are required by the report. So in my opinion, it's going to be a significant improvement.
You know, it's collected here at the bottom, and this is where people have the issues.
Which exhibit is you
Yeah.
referring to? Okay.
You're pointing to here on the screen?
Right there,
Is that
yeah,
correct?
yeah. And that's
Okay.
where
Right.
People
Right now,
have
there's
the issues
there's a
and-
sediment basin that's undersized. It was a temporary sediment basin for construction. It's basically to let water flush in and let some of the sediment settle out and then leave. It's not designed to handle any kind of large quantities of water. And so what is proposed is significantly larger with a lot more volume.
So it'll be better than what we have now.
Absolutely, yes.
This area?
That I can guarantee.
This area down here, is this the vacated road?
We're looking at the area along the south side of the site.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And that's a fence line just above it?
Yes, what's proposed is,
Is that a vacated road? There was a road there.
Is that a fence?
Is that a fence line directly above it?
yeah, what's proposed is a 6-foot cedar fence, cedar spruce fence directly on the property line, probably just to our side of the property line, but based on previous requests from neighbors, that's what was requested, so that's what we are proposing. If there's something different, such as a chain link fence or something like that, we'd be open to that as well.
All right. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name's Peter Wallenetz, W-A-L-Y-N-E-T-Z, and I own the property at 415 Franklin Avenue. I can tell you that I have had a major problem with water infiltration. I have spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to control the water in the basement. I don't want any more water in my basement. They have to keep the water on their property. My other question is, what's the form of ownership? Are these condos? Are these apartments? What's the makeup? How is are they rentals?
Well, we'll have the equitable owner testify to that, but I'll tell you that it is apartments.
There'll be apartments, okay. So the minimum size is 600 square feet and they're one-bedroom apartments, is that correct?
The ordinance requires, I guess.
Well, you're proposing 72, 12 are supposed to be 2 bedrooms, is that correct? And the balance are supposed to be 1 bedrooms?
That's correct.
Okay, so has the builder done an absorption study for the people who are moving into these apartments? And the reason that I'm asking this, and I want the council to know, is that I've represented several builders as a realtor in the borough. And I can tell you the absorption rate for 600 square foot apartments is like nil. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem if they were a little bit more upscale. My concern would be that if you haven't done the correct absorption, that maybe it should be a little bit more upscale with more 2-bedroom apartments. But I don't know what the makeup is. Is this subsidized housing?
We'll put on more testimony with regard to that with one of our next witnesses.
Okay, that would be my concern, is the density, that I just don't want the project to fail. I think the apartment should be larger and that it should be a little bit more upscale. And that might alleviate some of the concerns of the residents. But I don't want any more water on my property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Tish Jones, Jones. I just want to let it be known that I don't think when it comes to parking that we need to skimp on parking. Because I'm going to tell you that many of the people will have family members, there'll be holiday parties, there'll be other things, and if we just skimp it right down to 90 parking spaces, then where are the people going to park after that? So I just want to let you know. And I know that I go often, and I don't live at the senior apartments now, but I am there quite often. And I do stuff for clients there. So I'm just saying that don't skimp on the parking.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Madam Chair, my name's Rich Kirkner. I live at 405 Ann Street, about 200 feet south of the southeast corner of this property here. And I have questions with regard to the presentation given so far. I would ask to reserve time later on to provide read a letter from my wife and myself along with a neighbor, and also provide some other comment on how council should move forward. But I would like to restrict my questions at this point to what has been presented so far. And I would like to ask, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions that I would like to ask. Question 1 is, have there been any discussions with the borough on shared parking and stormwater management and on the memorialization of the original agreement between the borough and Friendship Fire Company on shared parking and the stormwater management.
Is that a Bruce question? Or can you answer that?
It's probably something that Bruce would better answer.
Yeah, he's a representative of the owner, so when he testifies, he can address that for you.
Okay, well, that is a question that's out there, and I expect to have an answer for that before everything's done. What are the sizes of the dwelling units, specifically the one-bedroom units?
Again, that's a question for the next witness. Anything in
Okay.
regard to the actual building and occupancy itself is the owner and the architect.
Okay, so I'm 0 for 2. Will there be an on-site manager?
I'm going to have to answer you the same way.
Okay, 0 for 3.
Okay, maybe we should just ask for your other witness to come up first, because this is getting a little frustrating.
Well, I think these questions are relevant to what already has been presented
agree
here.
with you.
But, you know, I'm coming up goose eggs on information. So, has a transportation plan been submitted per section 27-403 L5 of the zoning ordinance?
Adam, can you address that one?
The requirement of the zoning ordinance, we feel it was met within our impact statement. However, there was not a separate plan with a separate cover produced.
Okay. And what is the, what exhibit number is that?
That's exhibit A8.
A8, okay. With regard to stormwater, you talked about curb improvements. I have a question. Where does the stormwater go? Because I'm looking at that southeast corner of the property, and I don't want it to go there.
Ultimately, the stormwater will go into the public system. I'm going to refer back to Exhibit A4, the tax map, which is zoomed out a little bit further. Basically, I'm going to show with my cursor, the best of my understanding is that the stormwater pipe basically heads down to Grant Street across the existing recreation field. That is existing, it's in place, and that would be the discharge point for the stormwater basin. It's there, and that's where the small sediment basin currently discharges to. Our stormwater basin would need to be designed to work within the capacity of that pipe. So if the pipe was smaller, our basin would have to be even larger. That's basically the way the design would work.
Okay, because my stormwater problem is that the stormwater that runs down Ann Street on the east side of Ann Street between your property, the Friendship Fire Company property, and my property, there is no curb. And that, and the way that the street was paved, the low point is in front of my driveway, and I am constantly dealing with sediment buildup in front of my house from the runoff there. So I don't need any more stormwater runoff. So when you mentioned curb improvements, does that include curb improvements on the borough property along Ann Street? And that's my last question for now. Thank you.
The curb improvements are not proposed along Ann Street.
Where are the curb improvements proposed?
I'll refer back to Exhibit A6. Basically, the entire area that is shown in the light tan color would be surrounded by curb, except for those interior islands of the parking lot that would not be surrounded by curb because we need stormwater to infiltrate into those rain gardens so it could be filtered before it gets to the stormwater basin. However, the entire perimeter of the parking lot is going to be surrounded by standard concrete curb, some of which is already intact and will be preserved if possible, if grading permits.
Hello, my name is Maggie Wallison, and I live at 207 Grant Street, which is in the Walesyn. And my husband and I actually live in that southeast corner that they're speaking of as far as drainage is concerned. To stay on the subject of actual water infiltration within the ground, my husband and I actually have spent tens of thousands of dollars to fix our basement and our house so that it does not take on water. And the large majority of the water is not surface runoff, it's actually underground and hydrostatic pressure. And so the idea that the main system that will be supporting this facility is an underground reservoir, I might not be using the correct terminology, but that is concerning to us because we literally used to have a river underneath our foundation and we could see it from the inside of the house. So that's my first concern. I also share a similar concern as far as traffic congestion is concerned. Within that 2-3 block radius, we already just had 79 homes go in for Fillmore Village. We also had 36 homes go in for Fairview housing. The Renaissance Academy there is expanding, and we also have a lot of businesses that are currently existing or will be existing within the Franklin Commons. And so we share the similar concern of just infiltration of lots of traffic and congestion in that area, which is really a residential development, which we appreciate as a quaint community right now. And we are concerned with the amount of traffic that we'd be receiving. I'm not sure if we'll have a chance to give comments later, so I'm just going to give all of my comments now. I think one of the things that we've really appreciated about our community is the ability to have open space and for the community and its members to be able to utilize the park in its current state. There's always a lot of activity in the spring, summer, and fall with just individuals utilizing the space, but also some of the community utilizing it for organized sports. And just knowing what the parking situation is like up there just on any given Saturday, I really think that there may be some challenges when it comes to the number of parking spaces that are required to facilitate those types of community sporting events, as well as just generally we have gotten to see a lot of different festivals and all those types of things be able to utilize the space, and it seems like that would really be taken away from the community. And since in the center of the town a lot of things are being developed and a lot of the open space is already starting to get constrained, it seems like taking additional open space away from the community could just really change the character that we've really come to grow to love, and I think a lot of the other community members have as well. One thing that is also another concern is just impact on housing values in that area. I'm not really quite sure what that impact would look like, but I would suggest that that be one of the things that's considered just for the community and those that have invested in the community and purchasing a home. And I think what would really be helpful for the residents up there is just getting better transparency around the proposals, and specifically making public record around the criteria of admission. And I know a couple of the other individuals have shared that concern. We've had other developers come in, and they were coming in under false pretenses, and we weren't very clear on what was actually being proposed for the community. And I would just hope that the public would have the opportunity to really be able to take a look at what the proposed plans are, because it really impacts the community around us and the value of our homes specifically. So all in all, I just hope that the borough can really think about utilizing this in the way that's being proposed, as opposed to an open space that would also add to the community and expand the park that's currently there, and find ways of really just building the community as opposed to potentially taking away some of that really great open space that has built a lot of character in the North Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anybody else have a comment before I ask them to bring up the other witnesses? Okay.
Sylvia Foreman, 209 Grant Street here in Phoenixville, and I am Maggie's next door neighbor. She spent $10,000s of dollars. I'm in her price range also. I've had water in my basement. We've had the borough there. Brian has been there a number of times. If he wants a comment, that's fine, but I've had rivers coming down my yard where you could actually swim in. That's how much water was coming in. Also, the traffic up there, once you get the Renaissance and those additional townhouses, and now Fairview Village, all this is just going to impact the traffic that we have now. Because once you close down Emmett Street, which is closed because of the accident, we had traffic backed up. And I don't know if the police chief knew about it, but it was backed up on Grand Street from Franklin Avenue all the way down to Dayton Street, where people were trying to get back and forth. The traffic was unbelievable. So additional parking is not going to help because we don't need this here. I have been here the last time this was proposed. I asked the borough if they would look into buying it, putting it out of commission, putting it part of the field up there so we wouldn't have to go through this. I'm tired of water in my basement. I don't want it anymore. I've got it under control, I think. But doesn't say the next time that it rains that the water is not going to come down off of that field into my basement. Next time it rains and I get water and this project goes for, everybody's getting a telephone call to have coffee in my basement. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Linda Hudak, H-U-D-A-K. Linda Hudak, H-U-D-A-K. Okay, I hear what everybody has to say, and I don't want water in someone's basement, but my husband and I are on a very low fixed income. Housing in Phoenixville is at a 5-year wait. That's Episcopal House. That's St. Peter's. Any one of them. This is adding housing for those who don't know where to go, whose rent's going up, whose water and trash is going up. And if this isn't acceptable, let the borough somehow find property. For this is not for anybody. It's 62 above. There is a financial basis line that it goes by. It's not like everybody can get in there. But to take this away is like from Joe and I, from the next Joe and I's, and the next Joe and I's. Someday it might be your mom, your dad, who needs.
I wish it was, but they passed away a few years ago.
My parents have been dead longer than that.
Excuse me, ma'am.
And I don't plan to
Can you
argue.
direct your comment to council?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I don't plan to argue with the gentleman.
No.
I'm just saying, this is an open door for my husband and I, because 5 more years, people are living well into their 80s, still driving. This is a godsend, and I'm not the only one in the borough who feels this way. I'm sorry, I just wish somebody would think of what this housing would do for the people, so I wouldn't have to go out of town. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yep, sorry. One more. Hello, I'm Maureen Kirkner. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, anyway, Maureen Kirkner, Kirkner. I live at 405 Ann Street, again, at that southwest corner. I'm going to speak about the two things that everybody's talked about, impervious surface and water. Last Saturday, we had quite a downpour of rain all day long. If any of you would have traveled to check out the yards of any of the adjacent properties to Franklin Avenue, or Friendship Field, excuse me, you would have seen the ponds that we all got by the end of the day. I'm talking big ponds where you could pretty much let them freeze over and skate, about 10 kids on them. It's a lot of water when you're talking about the fact that the property hasn't even been built upon. So imagine when you're covering that lot with, I believe he said 58% impervious surface, how much more water is going to just run down into our houses, into our basements, into our checking accounts, taking our money away. I don't think anybody wants to have to dip buckets into water for an elderly neighbor who can't do it for herself, so that her basement doesn't flood, which is what I've done many times for my neighbor who's 95. Can't be here tonight to speak. I also have a concern about the traffic. Renaissance Academy is going to be bringing in cars and buses. I don't think that traffic has been considered. I don't think the traffic from the new townhomes has been considered. It's just such a small area to be putting all these things in. And I'd really wish that sometimes you guys would just come over and spend a day there instead of just looking at papers and reports and things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just make a quick statement?
Sure, go ahead.
There's been concerns regarding the stormwater, and I just wanted to clarify. Currently, the site and the site's stormwater is essentially uncontrolled. There's not a collection system that is taking it to a designed system. It's basically the little basin that's there is being fed by inlets that are, most of them are popped up out of the ground. They're not catching any water. And therefore, basically what runs off surface flow goes into that sediment basin. That's going to be a completely different design once this is built properly and is designed per the codes and per the requirements of the Department of Environmental Protection. We have to pass their standards to make sure that our stormwater design is safe and it fits and is a good use for this site. So therefore, what's going to be proposed, what is proposed on this site is going to be an improvement over what's there, because right now what's there is essentially uncontrolled.
My name is Rob Wallison. I'm husband of Maggie Wallison. It's W-A-L-E-S-Y-N. Again, reside at 207 Grand Street. If you look at that chart, basically that bottom right corner, it's completely diagonal to where that property is. I'm not going to be a dead horse with this again. I know the flooding issue is a huge thing. Again, thousands of gallons of water in our basement. I know they say they're going to control it. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. I'm sorry, what was your name? Sipley. He did not even know or have an understanding of where the actual drain pipe of that field is. I can tell you exactly where it is. I have thousands of pictures of that river hitting my house, and I have the pictures as they installed the pipe. Mr. Kirchner pointed out the angle of the water hits his house. It's horrible. But basically what I want to say is last time I spoke here when these guys were here, you know, we got to look at your comprehensive plan. You know, what did you talk about for the North Ward? What was the vision? What's going to enhance the character of that neighborhood? This isn't it. I mean, it's right here. Listen to these people. You know, this is it. That's not the vision. You're making a lot of people unhappy. We have tranquility right there right now. Work was done to fix that water flow a bit. I called Brian Watson quite a bit. I'm sure his ears are bleeding from all my phone calls. Mr. Crack, you came out to my property. Mr. Mayor, you actually came out to my property, walked the perimeter with me one day. So there's no doubt that there's a water problem. But this is what matters, is what the people are saying. And I really pray that you guys consider this to be the most important thing when making this decision. You know, this is it. It's not these guys. You know, it's not financial gain. It's the people in this neighborhood. All right, so please consider that. And I pray that you come to an understanding. This is what matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Go ahead.
My name is Marie Ashton, A-S-H-T-O-N. I, of course, have the home right next to the property there. And I only want to talk about stormwater management. I've heard a lot of people like Adam telling me with previous kinds of propositions, and it all sounded good, but right now you can come to my house and come on down to my basement, which is flooded. It's hard when you're 86 to try to get the water out of your cellar, because everything down there either molds or rusts. And, you know, but I do think that we do need senior housing, definitely. And I'd like to get on the list for that matter, if I, can hang on for 5 more years or so. And I think it's a great idea. But I would just want to, talk about the stormwater management. When I called the borough after our last, when the fire company was going to build this marvelous improvement, and I called them and I said, I'm having all of this water in my cellar. And, the borough told me that, it was my fault. It was my fault because they had installed everything that they were supposed to install. And the problem with that was that I did not have enough debris along the property line to absorb the water that was coming from their new property. And they had put in, they have a swale there, which is a playground for all kinds of children. And it's a lot. It never did anything for the water. Of course, that came into my basement, so, it sounds like a comedy, but it's the truth. And frankly, Adam, it's marvelous, but anytime you want to come over and help me get some of that water that you're telling me is not going to happen, but which has happened for a long time, I'll appreciate your help. Thank you.
I'll be brief. Brian Peppel, Sandstone Terrace. So I don't abut this property, but I consider it my neighborhood, and it's in my precinct, and I'm in that area quite a bit. I'd like to encourage those on council that are considering this to drive down Fillmore from this property down towards 113 any time of day. It becomes one lane less than 100 yards from here because of on-street parking. I don't even know if you could fit a fire truck through there, the way some people park from time to time. So I would encourage that. Also, I have a question for council. I understand, I could be wrong, wasn't there new zoning regulations passed in December? So I see some heads nodding. And this application predates that. I would be curious as to whether the new zoning regulations would even permit such a property. Because I know that zoning commission was appointed by council, made up of many citizens from around the borough that were considering a lot of the questions that are being asked here. So that's all I have. Thank you.
They'd be grandfathered in, and that's why the applicant raised the issue of the timing of their application.
I'd still like the question answered.
Right.
Hello, my name is Victoria Viscuso, Viscuso. I've lived at 427 Franklin Avenue for over 20 years now. Prior to that, my grandparents owned that property since 1949. That would be the southern part of the map that's on the screen now. I grew up at 432 Ann Street, which is the property directly behind mine, so I have a long history with this area. I do have some questions, and I'm not sure if it's something that Adam, you would answer, or Bruce. Basically, you were talking about the grading on the southernmost part of the property of whatever percentage that was. Will that grading be eliminated or reduced, or will it still sit that much higher than the land around it?
Right now, what's shown, actually, what's indicated on the plan where I'm indicating with the cursor, this gray area is the area of steep slopes. We're avoiding that based on the requirements of the ordinance. We're not touching that at all. We're basically holding that essential curb line where it is today. We're not proposing development any further down from where it's at currently today.
Okay, and I do have that question because I'm not sure when you look at this plan. Over here, there's no curb line down there. There is no curb line that separates my property from that area there. So when you're talking about you're respecting that curb line, the only curb line is up there.
Right. We're basically where the curb was, where there's stormwater inlets are already existing, and where the grading is already leveled off. That's basically where we're going to stop. We're not going to propose to change the grade of that steep slope area any further.
Okay,
if that answers your question.
So this height statement that you have where you can do 50 feet or 5 stories and you're only doing 3 stories, you've taken into account that that grade has elevated that portion by what, 8 feet or 9
Yes,
feet?
based on the ordinance definitions, we are fitting in with the requirements and actually less.
Okay, based on stories, but the feet fit, okay. And then the other question I had was, you made the statement that the primary occupant is required to be age 62 or over. Is there anything in place that after the buildings are filled, that age requirement can be changed, that it can be changed from a senior housing into some other form of housing at that point?
Currently, the zoning doesn't permit for that. It's written into the zoning ordinance that we're following for this plan, what we're permitted to do, and there's no leeway shown there that could change that.
That would be a legal question, and because only senior housing is permitted at this site, for them to get any other form of housing to be permitted here, they would have to appear before the zoning hearing board to allow for it to be, for the primary occupants to be someone other than age 62.
Okay, so in 5 years or 3 years after it's built, they can't just say,
That's
"Oh, we're
correct.
not going to do this anymore." Okay, all right, sounds good. Basically, I also echo the concerns of pretty much everybody else that's been up here. Congestion, that traffic. As I say, I live on Franklin Avenue. If I try to get out of my driveway at 5 o'clock, you will still find me there at 5:15. There is no way to get out because of the 4-way stop that's at the area of Grant and Franklin. It's now regulated. So before, no stop sign, you had a couple cars go by, you had a space, you could get out. Now, everybody's stopping, so you have no way to get in and out. Add 60 more cars, 99 more cars, that will be impossible. The water issues, of course, I live there, I understand. That's definitely happening. This is my folder from when it all started, when Friendship Fire Company and the borough divided the land. From that time on, it seems that there has been no transparency. To echo what Maggie has said, we find out at the last minute, if we find out at all. I can't see anything up close. I really don't know what's on that plan. It affects us. You make the decisions, but it affects us. It affects where we live and how we live, and our market values, our incomes, our abilities to stay here, pay your taxes, and be good residents. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I just really hope that the opinions of myself and the other concerned residents you'll take into account. At least give us more time to review this, more time to understand what you're trying to do, so we can feel like we know what's happening to our lives. Thank you.
Did anyone else have any other comments?
Hi, I'm Edwin Soto, S-O-T-O. I live at 7 High Street, current resident in the North Ward. And I also just wanted to let council be aware of the impact of Renaissance Academy and what that really means. We're looking at transporting, there are currently 930 students there. In 2015, they're looking to grow to over 1,000 students, and how that affects what everybody here has already discussed as far as traffic is concerned and how small Franklin is, and et cetera. And I just wanted to make you all aware of that. Thanks.
Thank you. Was there anyone else? Okay, could we hear from the rest of your witnesses then?
Sure. No, you're next. My next witness is Bruce Weinsteiger.
Yeah, couldn't you know, leave that one up just for a second.
Okay. Bruce is one of the members of Phoenixville LLC, which is the principal or the equitable owner of the subject property, as well as the architect, principal of the architect design firm who's designing the buildings and elevations as such. Mr. Weinsteiger's CV is in your packet as Exhibit A16. Why don't you, I don't know that they're familiar with you, so why don't you briefly describe your educational background and your experience and any certifications you have?
I graduated of Penn State University. Been working in the field of architecture for the last 30 years. Currently president of Architectural Concepts. We're located in Exton, Pennsylvania. We have a staff of about 15 architects and interior designers. If I have to say we have a specialty, it's probably in senior housing. And
any certifications that you have?
I'm licensed in several states, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Delaware. Sit on the Planning Commission, vice chair for East Vincent Township, a resident of East Vincent Township.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert in architecture in any municipality?
I have, most recently in Marietta, testified.
And what type of project was that?
I was also a senior housing project.
I moved him forward as an expert in architecture.
Okay, that's acceptable.
A couple housekeeping items. The property is currently owned by Friendship Fire Company. Is that correct, Mr. Weinstein?
That's correct.
There's a copy of the deed to the property included in the exhibit packet as Exhibit A1. You're one of the members of Phoenixville LLC. Is that correct?
Correct.
And if I show you what's in the exhibit packet as Exhibit A2, is that a copy of the agreement of sale you currently have with Friendship Fire for the property?
It is.
And there's several addendums attached to that. This agreement of sale is current, is that correct?
As far as I know, yes.
I guess why don't you briefly describe, this agreement of sale was entered into in January 2013. Why don't you briefly describe, your history with this property over the last year?
Sure. We preliminarily looked at this site as a general occupancy site, which means essentially open to families, thinking we had the proper zoning to move forward in that direction. That was also 72 units, but it was in 3 separate buildings, plus a clubhouse was proposed for the site. It didn't take long to find out that we did not have the zoning for that, and we pulled that application and came back with a senior project, same number of units, 72 units, which is a permitted use under the conditional use for this property.
And I guess if we pull up, can you pull up 812? We pull up Exhibit A12, which there's a picture on the board of it there.
It worked.
Works for you.
It works for me.
All right. Did your firm prepare this architectural elevation?
This is a rendering we prepared, yes. It's looking from the corner of Franklin and Fillmore, facing to the southeast. What we're proposing is, as we mentioned earlier, what we're proposing is a 3-story building with quite a bit of variation to the roof line to tie in with some of the neighboring properties. We'll have a wraparound porch at the corner of Fillmore and Franklin. We'll put some senior eyes on the park as that porch wraps around. The building itself is an L-shaped building, and what that does for is, just in good urban planning, it pushes the building itself to the outside of the site, to the perimeter of the site, consistent with neighboring properties. I think we're about 30 feet off the curb line. And in addition to that, it conceals the bulk of the parking behind the building, so you don't see a sea of parking as you're driving by the building.
I guess if we go to our next exhibit, which is Exhibit A13. Did you also prepare this plan?
We did, yes.
And what are we looking at here?
This is essentially it's the footprint of the building, the base plan, the first floor plan, and in that plan, if you can read it, it's sort of in the corner of the property is the elevator lobby. Where's your cursor? Maybe I can- oh. Yes. The elevator lobby in this location, there's on-site management. To address Mr. Kirtner's question, there is also on-site management. There's a large community room for the residents, including a kitchen. And this is the wraparound porch, which I mentioned earlier. The rest of the building shows essentially the apartments. The majority of the apartments are one-bedroom apartments. They're about 660 square feet as shown. And the two-bedroom apartments are featured on the corners of the buildings. We have about 12 two-bedroom apartments, which are about 900 and, I can't quite read that, about 960 square feet, I believe.
Now, the ordinance provides a reduced, the possibility of a reduced unit size for subsidized housing. Are any of these units being proposed at that smaller size?
No, they're not.
So we're proposing all the units to be in excess of 600 square feet, is that correct?
They'll be closer to 700 square feet, that's correct. I should mention that, I mean, the units themselves are relatively generous, but in addition to the living space, there is a large community room which does gather a number of the residents, so they do have options to essentially get out of their apartments.
I believe you discussed the amenities that are being provided in conjunction with the living units. You're not proposing any form of retail or service facilities at this site, is that correct?
We are not, no.
So no pharmacy, no hairdresser or any such?
No, there'll be likely be a fitness facility for the residents, probably a computer room on the upper floors, but nothing commercial that would draw outside traffic.
Why don't you describe to council, I guess, who you propose or who do you believe will be the type of residents for this project?
Well, this is a 62-plus project, and it's almost identical to the one we just completed in the borough of Marietta. That one's a little bit smaller. It was 56 units on 1.5 acres. We found there that the average age is actually about 10 years older than the minimum age required for occupancy. And so the average age incoming to that property, which just opened about a year ago, was about 70 to 72 years of age. The facilities are designed so people can age in place. They're all ADA accessible, handicap accessible. The units have the turning radiuses in the bathrooms, the grab bars, everything you could possibly need to live out your life in these units. Which is essentially what happens 10 years after opening. The average age is usually closer to 80. The parking shown on the previous site plan, we had 72 parking spaces shown within the courtyard. I'll call it the courtyard area of the site. If Marietta is any indication, we'll probably have about half of those spaces filled, which will leave a good bit of parking open for the park. And in answer to Mr. Kirtner's earlier question, we did speak with staff earlier, borough staff earlier, about that shared parking arrangement, and we intend to honor that arrangement. Anything else I should touch on?
Thank you. I have no further questions for Mr. Weinstein.
Did anyone want to ask him any questions?
Did you touch on all if there's any on-site management?
Yes, there will be on-site management.
24 hours or 24/7?
No, 9 to 5 essentially. Then there's a call system afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Could you just restate what your studies have found to be the actual average age of tenants?
Well, as I mentioned, the permittable age is 62.
Yes.
The incoming age at the Marietta facility was closer to 70. And as I mentioned, the tenants very seldom seem to leave these facilities once they're in. That population does age with the building. Sure.
Any other council members? Okay, anybody in the public have any questions for this witness?
I just have one question that I asked previously. Rich Kirkner, Kirkner, 405 Ann Street. And that question is, have there been any discussions with borough representatives with regard to shared parking and stormwater management?
Yes, there has been.
Mr. Bowers, were you aware of those discussions?
No, I've not participated in those discussions.
Okay. I'm the former president of council and the former representative of that ward. I wasn't aware of those discussions either. I didn't even know this thing was still alive until I got my council packet for the last meeting, the Friday before the last council meeting. So this really snuck up on a lot of people.
It wasn't our intention to sneak up on anyone. This project has been active for over a year and a half. With regards to the discussions, we were advised that there was a commitment from the previous developer, Father Evans, on this site to manage the stormwater from both the borough property and from this property, and that we would be required to honor that agreement, which we agreed to do.
Anyone else with questions for this witness? Okay. Do you have one more witness?
Yes.
I believe. Okay.
If I could mention one other thing, there's some question regarding the viability of filling this property up, I believe by a realtor in the audience. Our records indicate that there's a substantial waiting list at all the facilities here in town for senior housing. So we have no issues, or we think we have no problems filling this building up in no time. Thank you.
And my last witness is Joe Fiacco from Fiacco Engineering. He's the traffic engineer who was hired with regard to this project. I guess let's qualify you a bit, Mr. Fiacco. Please state your educational background.
I'm an engineer. I'm licensed to practice in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware.
Do you have any special certifications or anything?
I'm a certified professional traffic operations engineer. Basically, I'm a civil engineer who sat for an 8-hour closed. Okay. Okay. I'm a certified professional traffic operations engineer. So I'm a licensed civil engineer that sat through an 8-hour closed book test to demonstrate that I understand traffic operations.
I guess, and what's your year's experience with regard to traffic engineering?
I've been practicing for over 28 years now. I started with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. I worked as the traffic operation engineer while I was at PennDOT. I left PennDOT and worked the next 13 years in the private sector representing either the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation county engineering offices in New Jersey or municipalities throughout Pennsylvania, specifically in Montgomery and Bucks counties. Currently, I'm the appointed traffic engineer for Lower Southampton, Bucks County, and I've been doing traffic engineering studies and or reviewing traffic engineering studies for the duration of my 28-year career.
Have you ever testified before any state, county, or municipal bodies as an expert in traffic engineering?
I have. I've been accepted as an expert in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey at the county level in Pennsylvania. I believe in all 5 counties in southeastern Pennsylvania and numerous municipalities throughout southeastern Pennsylvania.
And I'll offer Mr. Fiacco as an expert in traffic engineering.
Okay, acceptable.
Okay. Mr. Fiacco, what was your role with this application?
I was asked to do a traffic impact analysis of this site. So the first thing we did was collect some data at the site to evaluate the existing conditions. What we did, we put 2 counters out on both Franklin Avenue and Philmont Street along the property frontage. We tried to keep them away from the intersection to keep from the influence of the people stopping at the intersection. And we counted about 2,300 cars on an average day. We had the tubes down for an entire week, so it was about 2,300 cars. Ironically, the numbers were very close. Philmont Street and Franklin Avenue were both. I'm sorry, Fillmore Street. And then we actually counted the vehicles at the intersection of Fillmore Street and Franklin Avenue, both in the morning and the PM. In the morning, we counted the cars between 7 and 9 a.m. in the morning, and we counted the PM peak hour between 5 and 7 p.m. And then we did a traffic analysis, and when traffic engineers do an analysis of delays at the intersection, typically you look at the worst 15 minutes of the peak hour for that intersection. And what we found was the average delays at that intersection there were less than 10 seconds per vehicle, per movement. So during the worst, when we analyze unsignalized intersections, we break them down into categories. The amount of delay falls into a category. A is the best category to be in. That's less than 10 seconds average delay for motorists. And then you have B, C, D, all the way down to F, which is if you need to wait over 50 seconds at the intersection. So again, the existing conditions out there are very favorable. The people at the intersection have little delay at the intersection. Then we took the next step was to figure out how much future volume will be out there. We assumed that this development will be built in the next 2 years, and we used PennDOT's rate of, it was about, for 2 years, it was about 1.5% increase in the overall through volumes on the state highways in this part of Pennsylvania. And we analyzed that value, again, was well under the 10 seconds per vehicle for those movements. Then we took the trip generation manual for this type of development to see how many new trips would be generated by this development. And what we found was about 15 trips in the morning peak hour, and I think it was about 19 or 20 trips in the evening peak hour. And I just wanted to note that because of this type of development, the peak traffic coming from this site doesn't necessarily coincide with the peak traffic that's riding on the roadways. Because of the type of development, it's more spread out over the morning and over the afternoon. But we evaluated the worst case, in this case, the worst hour that we counted of those 2 peak hours. And essentially, when we added that traffic in, that accounted for less than 2% of the traffic that's already out there at the intersection that we counted. And then we rerun our analysis, and again, we looked at this time. We looked at the intersection. We also looked at the 2 driveways, and in all 3 of those intersections, there'll be no cases where the average delay will be more than 10 seconds. So they still fall into the level of A category, or level service A category for unsignalized intersections.
And did you prepare a report with regard to your findings?
I did.
And if I show you what's in the packet as Exhibit A14, is that your report?
Yes, it is.
And what is the date of your report?
October 1st, 2013.
I think you already testified with this. Besides the traffic generated here, is the access drives, are there any conflicts or issues that you can see with regard to turns in and out of the site?
No. It's the area is relatively flat. It's a grid type of layout. Visibility is fine pulling out of these driveways, and again, the delays will be minimal.
And did you indicate that in your analysis you are looking at the projected growth over the next 2 years as indicated by PennDOT?
That would be the overall growth that PennDOT would expect on the state highways. That would not include specific developments that are in the immediate vicinity. Again, this development is expected to produce less than 2% of the traffic that's out there. So any other traffic that's generated by development in the surrounding area would only reduce that 2% to, and that's like 1.7%, even to a smaller percentage of the traffic out there at the intersection.
I have no further questions for Mr. Fiacco.
Okay, any questions from council?
Mr. Fiacco, let me make sure this jives here. This report that's in our packet is dated October 1st, 2013, yet the numbers that we're analyzing are from July?
Correct.
So, to the best of my knowledge, we've experienced, again, what I will say from earlier, a heavy amount of construction up in that area that I don't believe would be part of these numbers if this analysis was from July. You stated that you compared it to some of PennDOT projections. Is that right?
Yes, we put the tube counts down July 31st. They stayed down for a week. And the manual turning movement counts were actually collected on Wednesday, July 31st of 2013.
Would the PennDOT projections include the building of a 100-home townhouse community right next door, a low-income housing property directly across the street?
I just finished testifying to that. It's the overall growth of traffic on the state highways in this part of Pennsylvania, so it wouldn't specifically take into account a development right next door or an immediate proximity.
So those, I'm concerned about the people in that area. So that study that you're referencing, those numbers that you're referencing, aren't a true reflection of what is happening in that particular area.
My study reflected the traffic that was out there in July or August of this past year and superimposing this new development traffic on top of that, in addition to a 1.5% increase in the general background growth.
So it did take into consideration the new development?
This new development,
Not the other new development in the
Just
area.
new development and just general background growth. It wouldn't be specific, any additional known development that's approved or about to be approved within the borough.
Has there been any discussion, because that development is there and we have to deal with it, has there been any discussion about an updated traffic study to accommodate those numbers?
Actually, my understanding is, as this is a conditional use approval, they still need to go through the planning stages, so a formal traffic study will need to be done and brought before the borough. This was simply looking at and analyzing the impacts of this particular site over what's out there today. So a formal study will need to be done in the stages if the project moves forward.
Thank you.
Any other personal counsel?
Thank you. Again, just to clarify, when you use the word development in this report, you are referring to Friendship Village as the development, correct?
Correct.
Not development which is occurring in and around this intersection.
Correct.
Okay, very good. And again, just to clarify, projections used are a statewide number, not a number that is regional.
Right. What will happen if this project does move forward and a formal traffic study is submitted, we will get from the borough any approved projects that are under construction, expected to be built, or approved and about to be built that they know that are coming along board or maybe under construction, and add those figures into our study to get a better handle of, what needs to be out there if and when the project moves forward.
And lastly, the types of transportations that have been advanced as available to support the residents of this community are public transportation, SEPTA buses, Rover. In your opinion, are the streets of Franklin and Fillmore currently capable of handling a full-size SEPTA bus?
That's not something that I looked at it.
Thank you.
Anybody else on council? Okay, were there any other comments from the public before we move on from the, this? Okay.
Hello again, Maureen Kirkner, Kirkner, 405 Ann Street. I want to make a note that the traffic study was done in July, when school is out, when there's less traffic on the road. I'd be interested to see what those numbers might be in September or October. Another comment I want to make is in regard to public transportation. When they're talking about SEPTA buses, someone made a statement that the nearest stop is Franklin and Emmett. That is 2 long blocks away. For a senior citizen to walk that far in inclement weather along a sidewalk that may have not been paved, that's something to consider. I forget my third comment, so I'll just step away, and if I think of it, I hope you'll indulge me. Thank you.
Victoria Viscuso. And to piggyback on Maureen's statement, that's a big hill, going down from Franklin Avenue down to Emmett Street and to get back up. And I do, I walk over town for First Fridays and such. It wins me, not that I'm in the best shape. I work across the street at the Franklin Commons. I spend my day walking down Franklin until the road is clear so that I can cross the street. It is not 10 seconds, sorry, but I do it every day, twice a day, because I go home for lunch. All the way down until there's a clearing, and then I run across the street. There is a crosswalk there that had the little plastic man holding the flag so people would stop, because there's a daycare right there. The plastic man was ruined repeatedly. The borough won't put another plastic man there because it's a waste of money. There's a lot of traffic, whether this is going to add to it or not. It's just the situation is a lot of traffic, a lot of cars, and as I say, I cross that street 4 times a day. I'm walking the dog up and down the street all the, on my off hours. There's a lot, and I think there is definitely an increase during the school year versus that first week of August when the little strips were put out. Thank you.
Sorry, I did remember my comment. Again, Maureen Kirkner. One of the gentlemen who testified second made a statement that this project has been ongoing for 1.5 years, but that's not really true. There was an initial project that was brought before council and was pretty much scrapped. This is a new project that has pretty much been just brought to our attention, as Mr. Kirkner stated. So to say that this project has been ongoing for 1.5 years is not true. A project for this property has been ongoing for that time, but not this particular project. I just wanted to make that clarification as I understand it. Thank you.
Mr. Weinsteiger can address some of those transportation concerns while we're fresh on our mind. I said Mr. Weinsteiger can address some of those transportation concerns that were raised by a couple of the last witnesses.
This is an independent living, and we do rely on public transportation, but I would say, based on previous projects we've done, at least 50% of the residents do have their own cars. However, if the occasion arises, management does make provisions to accommodate people to get them to their medical appointments or to their shopping appointments. There is, as I mentioned, full-time on-site management, and they do accommodate their residents to make sure that they get to where they need to be.
Richard Kirkner, 405 Ann Street. And what I'd like to do is I have 2 letters I'd like to read into the record, and then I'd like to make some comments. The first letter is submitted, my neighbor, William Marchione Jr., 303 Grant Street. He could not be here this evening. He asked that I read this letter and submit it on his behalf. Attention, Mr. Mayor, Borough Council President, and council members Again, we find ourselves fighting to protect and preserve our open space. The open space in question is a 1.9 acre section located on the northwest corner of Friendship Field. We, the people of the North Ward, believe that this 1.9 acre section must be protected and preserved. We also ask the mayor and council to work together and come up with a plan to buy the said section and restore it back to the already existing tract of land known as Friendship Field Park and Recreation, in quotes, thereby putting an end to this ongoing issue of development. The people of the North Ward stand united with a unified voice that says no to any type of construction or development of this section of land in question. It seems this issue of development continues to be raised, and it feels as though the voices of the North Ward are not being heard or respected. We again hope that it will become obvious, given the outcry against this new proposal, that our no means no, and that the mayor and borough council will put a permanent plan in place to keep this open space. Respectfully, William N. Marchione, Jr. And then I'd like to read and submit a letter on behalf of myself and my wife. Dear council members and Mayor Speck, we would like to share our thoughts with regards to the conditional use application Phoenixville LLC filed for Friendship Village at 501 Franklin Avenue. First, fully half of the frontage of the plan is along Fillmore Street. Council must determine if Fillmore, between Franklin Avenue and the eastern boundary of Friendship Field Reservoir Park, is to be a development-free zone. Residential units facing Fillmore Street in this area, across the street from a playground and a macadam basketball court that gets much use, weather permitting, is counterintuitive to the existing character of the neighborhood. For this reason, we implore council to reject this plan outright. It is a conditional use. You do not have to grant it. Further, if council desires to host the Firebird Festival at Friendship Field in the future, then you should give serious consideration to purchasing this parcel to extend Friendship Field Park. Based on our experience on December 14th, 2013, the small crowd that attended the Firebird Festival was a challenge to control, with attendees using many of the properties surrounding Friendship Field as cut-throughs to the park. A crowd the size of that originally projected would have absolutely overwhelmed this area. It will only be worse if 501 Franklin Avenue is developed. The borough has the money to purchase this parcel. It has $4.2 million in general fund reserves, and government accounting guidelines recommend an appropriate reserve for a budget of the borough's size is $2.8 million. Granted, these guidelines are subject to their own controversy. The appropriate amount could be more, it could be less. We think it's appalling that the borough holds on to such a large amount of taxpayer money, collecting a meager fraction of a % on the investment, denying the public that built that reserve the benefit of putting it to use. Please consider these specific issues with regard to the application. Transportation plan. Council may require the developer to submit a transportation plan and provide transportation service to the residents. Has that transportation plan been made one of the exhibits of evidence in this hearing? Council has to answer if that's adequate. If not, and if it does not exist, then council has another reason not to grant this conditional approval. Again, I direct you to section 27-403L5. Shared parking and stormwater management. The borough entered into a cooperative agreement with Friendship Fire Company for shared parking and stormwater management when the property was transferred. The parking configuration of the Friendship Village proposal does not seem to engender shared parking with the park. To our knowledge, and one of us was president of this body for almost 4 years until 2 weeks ago, there have been no discussions between the borough and the applicant in this context. If there were, why wasn't the former council president and representative of the ward involved in them? I will skip the paragraph about government subsidized versus other senior housing, since it seems that point is moot with regard to the size of the dwelling units. And add, however, if council is so disposed to grant this conditional use, we suggest it add the following conditions. Ban units along Fillmore Street. That's bullet point number 1. Bullet point 2, or demand the dedication of open space along Fillmore Street and allow the applicant to use that in its calculation of units. Bullet point 3, require the applicant to provide $50,000 for improvements at Reservoir Park, including new lighting. For example, only one light standard is on the basketball court presently, when in the past there were 2, and improvements to playground equipment, which has probably run its course in terms of age. Bullet point 4, require the applicant to provide $45,000 for traffic improvements. This is in line with what the developer of Episcopal House contributed to the borough in 2003, adjusted for inflation. Bullet point 5, require the applicant file a transportation plan that includes owner or manager provided transportation services for the facility, including access to services at reasonable intervals, and provides an escrow fund in the event the owner or manager should change or enter into a financial situation that would cause either to cancel the service. If council is so disposed to entertaining this option, I would encourage it to continue the hearing to allow for public inspection of the transportation plan, which apparently does not exist. Bullet point 6, require the applicant to include its agreement of sale as evidence in the hearing. Apparently that has been fulfilled. Thank you for your consideration. Respectfully, Richard M. Kirkner and Maureen S. Kirkner. Some comments I would like to add, since it seems whenever you have hearings of this nature, you always have people, being sworn in as experts. I'm not an expert, but I realize it's 35 years ago this month. I covered my first municipal meeting as a reporter. For 15 years, I was a municipal reporter covering this body for newspapers, and in addition, newspapers in New York State, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. Also, regional business editor before I went into healthcare journalism. 1993, I became a member of the Phoenixville Zoning Hearing Board. I know this zoning ordinance rather intimately. For 4 years, I was on the zoning board. I had the MPC course on zoning and municipal planning. I was on council for 4 years. I was president for 5 years, including 1 year as president my previous term. As council for 4 years, then I took a 4-year break. Then as you know, I came back on council. Friendship Field has bookended my last stint on council. I got involved on council because developer came in, wanted to build townhouses on Friendship Field. Now I'm dealing with Friendship Field again. It's the gift that keeps on giving, I guess. So I was also the first chair of the Phoenixville Regional Planning Committee. I've attended seminars on regional planning. I was involved with the group that wrote the new zoning ordinance. I was on the council that adopted the amendment that has brought us here tonight. I'd like to give you some history of the project. When the Episcopal Diocese of Philadelphia came in with a plan for, I believe, 63 units, it looked nothing like this. You look at this configuration. The impervious surface is pushed to the southeast corner of the property. As you've heard, there are stormwater runoff issues. It seems to be concentrating the impervious surface in the most vulnerable area for stormwater management. You have units across the street from a playground. I don't know how the people who, if that gets built, I don't know how those people are going to feel when Papa Basketball League starts up in the summer, or on Father's Day, or when when Papa has its event up there, or the Firebird Festival with the rock music blaring. I mean, that just seems like a terrible, terrible location for dwelling units along Fillmore Street. You know, the purpose of zoning and planning is to preserve and respect the character of the neighborhood. And with those units on Fillmore Street, they dramatically alter the character of that neighborhood. That's a recreational area. It's not a residential area there. The configuration is, it just doesn't work for that neighborhood. It doesn't work because of the impervious surface and stormwater problems. It doesn't work because you're putting dwelling units on an area where that has historically been recreation only. So I would also like to clarify a comment made regarding the Planning Commission recommended the conditional uses. I read the action memo. The Planning Commission recommended holding a conditional use hearing. I think that's very different from recommending a conditional use. I just want to clarify that. The transportation plan is not adequate. I think you can reject this outright. You can say there's no transportation plan. It is spelled out here in very plain English in the zoning ordinance. And if they don't pick this up by the time they bring a conditional use request to you, that's on them. That's their loss. They should have caught that. And finally, you know, if you're going to host events like the Firebird Festival, I'm looking at that driveway there along the southern perimeter of the property. One, softball players are going to have a ball with that, pulling in there. Maybe drinking in some of those parking spaces, I don't know. And then the Firebird Festival. I mean, that is... If you're going to host events like the Firebird Festival at Friendship Field, you really need to seriously consider if any development here at this point is appropriate. Granted, senior housing is needed, but I don't think with the units on Fillmore Street, the concentration of the impervious surface, and also the way this parking is designed, it doesn't engender shared parking the way that the original plan with Friendship Fire Company and, as I remember, the plan with the Episcopal Diocese does. This basically builds a wall between the shared parking for the park and the parking for the dwelling units. So as I see it, Council, I think you got enough here to reject this outright, but at least you should continue the hearing to allow us and the public time to inspect the documents, the evidence that has been presented tonight. I would like to present these letters for the record. I'm sorry I didn't make more copies. We had a problem with our printer just before we left the house, so that's how it goes sometimes. And I guess I present these to Mr. Kilkenny, court reporter.
Sorry, if you could just give us a minute. Okay, sorry about that delay. Okay, was there any more questions from or comments from the public or from council?
Sylvia Foreman, 209 Grand Street. I'm here now because it looks like you're going to be finalizing whatever. You have Republicans, you have Democrats, you may have an independent. Please don't vote your party. Vote what you think is right for the citizens of the North Side. We are here for you. We'd like you to be here for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then. Anybody from council have anything to say? Please, Mr.
There, within planning, within the proposal, what am I trying to say? Within applications that have been made before Planning Commission, there is another senior housing complex that has an indefinite extension. Is that correct? Center Street?
An indefinite extension. There is a part 3 of that development that hasn't gone anywhere in at least 7-8 years.
No demand?
Well, it's not so much a matter of demand. It's a matter of what was allowed to be built based on bedrooms, and so the remaining bedroom opportunity for the third part of that parcel doesn't function with zoning. So, and there's been no appetite by the property owner to do anything with that part 3. It's basically been dead in the water for almost 7 years.
Do you, maybe not appropriate, but do you know offhand the acreage of that property?
I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else? All right, so does someone want to make a suggestion on where we go from here? Or make a-
I do have some closing comments if we're
do we
not.
want to close it first, or do?
Yes,
go
and to
ahead.
address some of the things raised in the comments that came before the board. There was a statement made that this is conditional use and you don't have to approve it. A conditional use is a permitted use, and I'm sure your solicitor will advise you with regard to the legalities of a conditional use. A conditional use is a permitted use that, as long as you meet the enumerated criteria with regard to that use, that you are required to approve it, but may impose reasonable conditions on the use to effectuate the intent of the ordinance. Some things were raised as potential conditions. I'm sure your attorney will advise you of what things are legal and not legal conditions that can be raised. I mean, there are issues with regard to what a valid impact fee is. The applicant did say he's willing to entertain discussions with the borough regarding addressing any concerns regarding EMS or some of the other issues, and we are willing to entertain that, but I'm sure your attorney will advise you with regard to some of the other suggested conditions with outright fees imposed and such, but we can discuss those at a later date with regard to reasonable conditions for the project. There was a statement made that there was a misrepresentation with regard to the Planning Commission recommendation. That's why I provide you as one of the exhibits the actual minutes from the Planning Commission that appear to suggest that they recommend approval of the conditional use. I understand what the action memo said. The action memo said schedule the hearing, but the minutes of the meeting reflect that they recommended approval of the conditional use. With regard to history of the site and the adoption of the zoning ordinance, I did provide you with the Borough Council minutes from September 13th, 2011. Mr. Kirkner was president of Borough Council at that time. I'll allow you to read them, but for some reason at that time, Mr. Kirkner believed that the development of this site for senior housing was key into, and I don't want to paraphrase his wording, but it appeared that Mr. Kirkner indicated that the site is a mess and that we need to have this project in the neighborhood. The Regional Planning Commission thought the project belongs in our community. The Planning Commission is advisory, and there's existing problems in the neighborhood, and this project helps fix that part of the town, and we can fix that tonight. He also was asked if he had talked to any other neighbors, and Mr. Kirkner responded that the people he talked to said it would address the issues at the site. So for some reason, there was support for a senior housing project at this site back in 2011. That site was slightly differently configured at the time. It was a much taller building proposed for the site, more of a high-rise. I believe it did contain 72 units at that time. It was put forth by Father Evans, who was a member of Borough Council at that time, but for whatever reason, it had support of Council President at that time. That being said, we move our exhibits into evidence. If you think there needs to be discussions outside regarding potential reasonable conditions, we're willing to discuss those with representatives of the borough, and if they want to be addressed at the next council meeting, that's fine. But we have no further testimony. There does not appear to be any further witnesses, so we would expect that the hearing be closed at this time.
May I reply to some of those statements, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, in 2011, I supported a 63-unit senior housing site here. It was configured completely differently. The parking was, the way the parking was configured was more conducive to shared parking with Friendship Field, and there were no units on Fillmore Street. So yes, but this is radically different. And not only that, I lived through the Firebird Festival, and I saw that there is still a need for more open space there. Things happen that change your mind, and that happened. But I didn't say, well, I did say there are ways you can turn it down, but I also said there are ways you can get them to move their units off of Fillmore Street.
Thank you. Was there anything else before? Okay, I want to ask Mr. Kilkenny what our options are here. Do we have to close this hearing, or can we continue, or should we continue the hearing? Like, what exactly is in, what?
Yeah, we're in the system. You have several options this evening. You can close the public hearing if you've heard testimony and council is reasonably informed to give a decision tonight, or you may continue it to your next council meeting or another date that you specify on the record.
Okay, in my opinion, we have got an awful lot of information here. A lot of it we just got. And yeah, I see exactly what the public thinks of this, and it seems to be about 95% are against this. And I think we need to look into it a little further, get some more possible, some conditions, I suppose, that we should add on there. And, I would really like to entertain a motion to continue this meeting.
Second?
So you want to continue the public hearing to the next
To the next-
regularly scheduled council meeting?
Right.
Is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
Okay, did anyone have a comment on that? All those in favor? Aye.
Abstain.
Okay, so that's 7-0-1.
And just as an abundance of caution, so you continue to, can you go ahead and close the public hearing too, Mr. Crack?
We have to close the public hearing too? Okay.
An abundance of caution, go ahead.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Well, you continued it.
I thought we continued it.
Yeah.
So didn't we continue it? Okay.
Why don't you announce the date of that meeting?
We
too?
announced the date of the meeting, we're good. Yeah. What's the date of the next council meeting? Yep.
Continue it to February 11th. Okay, and at this point, before I turn this back over to Jim, I think we all need like a 10-minute break because this has been a really long night so far.
That would be true. Absolutely. I need a cup of coffee.
I'll bring council back from its break at 11:43 and continue on with the agenda. I believe we're at item 11, reports of committees, boards, and commissions. Item 11. We have, under A, Planning Commission, there's 2 subdivisions. What is council's pleasure with regard to those items? Mr. Bowers?
Make a motion to consider resolution for final approval of the subdivision and land development plan for Stephen Coons subdivision, recommended from the Planning Commission on December 17th by a vote of 4-0.
I will second the motion.
That was a motion to approve, Mr. Bowers, correct? Yes, it is. Okay, and Mr. Prendrick, you seconded?
Yes, I will second the motion.
Okay. On the question. Mr. Bowers?
The street, the street paralleling the subdivision, that's currently State Route 113?
Yes.
Okay. And just a question. You have to secure separate state permits before you can begin construction?
Yes.
If I can ask you to step up to the podium, identify yourself.
My name is Andrew Eberwein. I'm with E.B. Walsh and Associates. We were the civil engineers responsible for the preparation of the plan. We have to obtain a permit from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation for the driveway. It's a low-volume driveway. I don't foresee it being a problem, but until you're going to go to construction, it really doesn't make sense to get that permit because it has a shelf life. So if they don't start the construction within the first year, then we'd have to reissue the permit. So once they're ready to start, we'll go and we'll obtain that permit. We have every other permit in hand.
Okay. Does the borough have any concern with the timing, or is there any work that he cannot do until he gets that permit from the state?
No, I think our permitting process will allow him to do what he needs to do, but I would agree with him because those permits go stale so quickly. As long as you can push that out, the better off you are, especially with PennDOT.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Richter?
Is it a requirement, or did the Planning Commission have any renderings or drawings when making their decision?
Yes, they did have, there were various plans with various drawings that were shown, I believe, at several of the meetings. And the applicant is here. He does have copies of things if you need to look at them.
I handed him a set of plans of 9 drawing sheets. I thought you guys would have seen them. I'm sorry, I would have brought more. It's a 4-lot subdivision. Right now, there's a house that sits on the corner that's in this very much a state of disrepair that's going to be removed. And 2 twin homes will be constructed. One set of houses will be fronting on Dayton Street, the other one on, North Street, which is in the back. We'll provide a central driveway between the units, garages for the units, and off-street parking for all the units in the rear of the 4 homes. We're going to be installing sidewalks along both of the sides where they're not there, preserving 2 very large trees on Route 113. Emmett Street, there's really 2 big trees, so we moved the sidewalk in at the request of the Planning Commission, and it actually made a lot of sense because those trees are really nice. They benefit the development as well as the borough. They're staying, sidewalk will be behind them, inboard of that. All the other improvements have been reviewed by your engineer and found to be acceptable. Is there any questions I can provide? Or there's also a landscape plan in there as well. The existing house sits right on the corner of Emmett and Dayton. If you're coming Emmett into Dayton, it's on the right-hand side.
What's the square footage of it?
The lots?
Of the homes. Just to give some type of size, scale.
They're 22 by 40, 3-bedroom. I'm going to say 1,800, 2,000 square foot houses. Set off with garages in the rear.
I recall that during the planning commission meetings, we had a couple questions around the central shared parking space. Particularly 2 questions around, one around trash pickup and where the dumpsters would be placed. If I recall last meeting, that was still to be decided.
The trash company and or the borough is going to tell us where they're going to pick the trash up. I mean, we'll comply with whatever. Each individual homeowner will be responsible for trash collection.
Okay.
So I would think they would all be put at the driveway because they're going to probably be back in the garage. I don't think they're going to be out in the front, but if the borough wants them in the front on Dayton and on North Street, that's where they'll put them. But I would think that the garbage would be kept in the garage and they would carry them out the driveway and place them on Emmett and they'd collect them right there.
So yeah, I just want to confirm for the record that they are going to be single units. It's not a centralized dumpster or...
Oh, no,
Okay.
it'll be single units. There's no dumpster.
And then one of the other questions was around plowing or maintenance of the shared. I just want to be sure that's not up to the borough to plow the shared parking that's going to be between your tenants.
The driveway is owned equally by the 4 people that'll have use of it, and they will be responsible for the maintenance of it, the plowing of it, and the like.
Okay, thank you very much.
Not the borough.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none. On the question, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries 8-0.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
What's left of it, but appreciate it.
Actually, have a great morning.
Moving on with the agenda, we have item number 2 under Planning Commission. Mr. Richter?
I'll make a motion to approve the final resolution on the subdivision land development plan for Merchants Loft 3.
Thank you. Second by Ms. Dugan. On the question, comments? Seeing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 701. Moving on to item 11B, Regional Planning Commission. I don't believe there's any report. No. We have. Moving on to item C, Historical Architectural Review Board. We have 1, 2, 3 items under that. What's council's pleasure?
All right, I'd like to break it up into 2 pieces, because actually the first one, where it says approval, it was denied, so I'm requesting that we're denying this application. So I'll make a motion to deny the sign request for 305 Bridge Street as recommended by the Harbor Action Memo of January 7, 2014.
Second.
Second by Mr. Richter. On the question, comments? Seeing none. All those, and we are voting for denial, so, and I vote would be to deny it, just for clarification purposes. All those in favor of denying the sign request, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. 8-0. It has been denied.
Okay, and I'll bundle the last 2, make a motion to approve the sign request for 28 Gay Street and for 12 South Main as recommended by the Harbor Action Memo of January 7th, 2014.
Second.
Second by Mr. Richter. Motion by Ms. Dugan. Comments on either? Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the sign request, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 8-0. They are approved. Moving on with item 12, council action referred from committee. I don't think there's anything here, but we'll go through Police and Personnel Committee. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to ask council if they would entertain making a motion to instruct the Civil Service Commission to put together an eligibility list for police officers for the Phoenixville Police Department.
Second that.
I can't make the motion, I'm asking.
Oh. Make the motion.
I will second the motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Kuznar and a second by Mr. Perednik. On the question, comments? Mr. Bowers?
Well, just note that the 2014 budget did account for that action and is funded for that purpose.
I
believe it was. Pretty sure it was.
For the creating the list, yes.
The list, okay.
We don't have a current list, correct? It has expired.
That's correct. It expired in late September, early October.
That's what I thought. That's more for those in the audience, those that are left, and for people at home. On the question, any additional comments? All those in favor of signifying, or of requesting the Civil Service Commission to create that list signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No, sorry, there's an aye.
Opposed? I don't think we had any. 8-0 passes. Anything further from the Police and Personnel Committee? Moving down with item B, Parks and Recs. Anything from Parks and Recs Committee? Finance Committee? That's probably a good thing, maybe a bad thing. Infrastructure? No. Economic Development? Policy? I don't believe there's anything coming out of policy. With that, we'll move on to item 13, public participation. I'll reopen public participation to individuals that want to comment. Anything new? Seeing none, we'll close that second round of public participation and move on to staff reports. Mr. Mayor?
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. My first mayor's report. Basically, just to inform the public what to expect in the mayor's report. I'm still gathering and thinking what to include. I'd like to include like any current or any important information that's gone on. I'd like it to be a spot to educate the public on issues. I'd also like to probably add in there specific trainings that our officers go through on a regular basis, maybe to highlight and just inform the public of what's going on there. Also, we're considering a website within the borough's website to have a mayor's corner. I'll be working with the manager and staff on that. What has occurred so far in January, I just want to commend our Public Works Department. I know that we were faced with this big storm. I was able to follow a lot of instructions and not go outside. And I know there was an issue or two with people complaining about plowing or whatever. But again, along the lines of educating the public, you know, during certain degree weather, salt is just not effective if it is applied. But I know for a fact that Manager Crack and Mr. Watson had planned the day before the storm that, you know, I came in and asked them, you know, the staff were already sent home waiting for that first flake to fall before they called them in. So I think it was handled very well, and I have all the confidence in the world in our staff, and that was a very difficult time. I also want to give kudos to the Phoenixville Volunteer Fire Department, who within that first 7 to 10 days of January responded to an unprecedented 35 calls, all hours of the day and night, where members of your community, volunteers, get out of bed and respond to an alarm that goes off. I know the hospital had a busted pipe. There was busted pipes throughout, and all other various kind of calls. So well done to them. one of my main priorities within the department is we've been working on the accreditation of the department, and that's going to be meet the high standards of the Pennsylvania Law Enforcement Accreditation Commission. And part of the advantage of that will save taxpayer money. We'll save taxpayers some dollars. We're right on the doorstep of having accomplished this accreditation, and the chief, myself, and the team in the department will be furthering this effort. I believe, the only public sharing information I'd like to give here, I got to give kudos to a resident. One of the first calls I got was a message left on the machine about a pothole on Nut Road that had taken out 4 or 5 cars. And when I retrieved the message, the citizen was calling 911 and was able to get through to our department. Our department at least was able to identify the pothole, the hazard, put cones in there. Brian Watson was able to follow up with that. It was on a state road, and the pothole was repaired. And when I was able to call this citizen back and said that he was very thankful of that. So just to pass on to the public, when after these types of storms, if we do have the potholes, if it's a state road, you could call 1-800-FIX-ROAD. That's 1-800-349-7623. Or if you're uncomfortable making any of those kind of calls, you can call the mayor's office, and the mayor will make sure that it's addressed. You know, you leave your information, we'll have the follow-up, and we can address that. So I hope I did okay with this first mayor's report, and thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Manager's report?
Yes, Mr. President, I've got 3 things. Just to follow up on the mayor's discussion with regard to the snow. For the storms that we had in December through this most recent, just to give you an idea of how much we were involved, we had 300 hours of overtime and 70 hours of double time to take care of all of that snow. We used about 300 tons of salt and 200 tons of non-skid, so that's a lot out of our budget right out of the get-go. But our guys were up to it, and we did the best that we possibly could there. In your packet, you received a memorandum regarding the 4th of July celebration. We went out and got three quotes. They all came in at exactly the same amount, $9,000. Based on the types of shells and the types of program, looking at them apples to apples to apples, it's staff's recommendation that Celebration Fireworks get the nod for a quote of $9,000. If you authorize that, we have about half of that amount already carryover from last year. As you know, Ms. Johns and her entourage go out and get the remaining of those dollars. But I have to put it on the record that if they don't, and you authorize this, we've got $5,000. If they don't, the other $4,000 is ours as well. But they've done a very good job in the last couple of years. Should not be a problem. We need to move it forward so that we can engage the company, get on the 4th of July ticket, and then we wind up paying 25%, I believe, in the April timeframe. But it would be our recommendation that you approve this tonight for Celebration Fireworks. That's for one item. And then I also, in your packet, not in your packet, on the table tonight, we need to get the signature cards because we now have new officers. Myself and Public Works Director, Mr. Watson, continue to sign the live signatures. We also have for Mr. Kovaleski as the president, and then Mr. Bowers as assistant secretary, the 4 signatories, if you're so inclined.
Thank you, Mr. Crack. Any questions or any action on the 2 items that, Mr. Richter?
I'd like to make a motion to, at the staff's recommendation, use Celebration Fireworks for our 4th of July annual fireworks celebration.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Richter, second by Mr. Bowers. On the question, Mr. Bowers?
We, of course, can defer a decision on venue.
Absolutely.
Any other comments? I just have one. Has anyone reached out to Karen Johns to see if she's willing to spearhead again this year?
She reached out to me.
I thank her for doing that then. On the question, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 8-0. Any action from council on the resolution, the requested resolution that we received tonight regarding the signatories for the bank accounts? It's my understanding that if we don't have that in place, we won't be able to potentially access funds. We won't be able to sign checks.
That, arguably, that's not true. Mr. Watson and I still have, ours would be in continuance, but that's not the preferred method. We prefer to have the stamp signature of council president and a live signature, either Mr. Bowers, Mr. Watson, or myself. It is something you need to do to conduct business.
Do we need a motion here to do something? Okay, I'll make a motion that we accept the proposal from council.
Approve the resolution.
The resolution from,
Ms. Dugan and Ms. Mayo made the second. Sorry, Mr. Dalton. I'll give you the next one. On the question, any comments? Mr. Bowers?
And I'm sorry, manager may have said it, but it was not in our packet. It was on our desk this evening. Yeah, and front and back.
Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 8-0 passes. We have the co-director's report in our packet. We have the Public Works Director's report. Mr. Watson, anything to add? Any questions for Mr. Watson? The Fire Chief's report and Finance Director's report. The Fire Department Liaison, anything? Yep. Yeah, I haven't met, okay.
Sorry. We need a brief executive session for two items, one related to litigation and the other one related to personnel, essentially. Personnel. Real estate, right, yeah.
Is there going to be any action coming out?
There possibly. Maybe.
Okay, so
Yeah.
unfortunately, guys, you'll have to stick around until executive session is, and we need. Okay. Then council at 12:05 will go into executive session anticipating coming back for action. Coming back from executive session at 1:03 a.m. on Wednesday morning. In executive session, we talked about personnel matters, litigation matters, and real estate matters. Is there any action that council wishes to bring to the floor at this time? Mr. Richter?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to allow Unravel, Turner, Burke, and Freeze to continue with the two items in process at the current state and time.
Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Prednick has the second on that. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 8-0. Any other action coming out of executive session?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion for the solicitor to appeal the zoning decision on signs for the school.
second.
Second by Ms. Dugan. Motion by Mr. Prednick. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 7-1. Motion passes. Mr. Bowers is a nay. Any other action by council? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you very much.